Hi, everyone, and welcome to our session on when Mother Nature becomes big business. Thank you, Prohibition Partners, for inviting us and for hosting this session. My name is Schlag. I'm head of research at Drug Science, where we deal with drug regulation and drug policy of all kinds of drugs, illicit as well as licit. And very relevant to the current session, in July this year, we've launched our medical psychedelics working group, addressing some of the issues that hopefully we'll be talking about today. So with the financial boom in natural products, especially cannabis, as well as psychedelic plants, there obviously comes across a question in terms how far the commercialization of nature should progress, who should benefit, what we should look out for, and how we can make sure that all stakeholders are really involved in the decision-making as well as the eventual outputs of these very exciting new medicines, or not so new. So it's really an exciting panel to host in exciting times. I know we have US guests here, so lots of exciting things happen in the elections. One of the exciting things for us here is the changes in drug policy, which seems to have taken on quite a progressive perspectives in relation to both cannabis as well as psychedelics, medical as well as in terms of recreational, and of course, especially related to psychedelic plants. So very exciting, and I think a very timely and hot topic, which I'm looking forward to hosting. I'm going to give the panelists a minute each to introduce themselves, starting with Victoria, please.
Thank you, everyone. It's a delight to be here. I develop medicines. I have founded and run two not-for-profit pharmaceutical companies, one in human parasitic infections and the second in reproductive health or contraception. I joined the MAPS board some time ago, also a not-for-profit entity, and I am co-CEO and co-founder of Sacred Medicines. We are developing ayahuasca tea for use in the world.
Excellent. Thank you, Victoria. Kuauhtli, would you like to introduce yourself?
Yes, good day. My name is Kuauhtli Vasquez. I'm a native of Texas, from the native nation of the Kuauhtli, and my family has a tradition of using peyote, among other plants, for ritual purposes in the traditional indigenous ways. And I've been conducting ceremonies for like 25 years, and I visited like 36 countries where we do rituals and also use other methods such as the sweat lodge and traditional dancing. But the primary plant that we use in our ceremonies is the peyote cactus. And I am currently what you would call the medicine keeper for the Native American church chapter of which is called the Teocalli Quetzalcoatl, and it's based in Texas.
Thank you. Keith?
Mm-hmm.
Hi, good evening. My name's Keith Abraham. I'm a military combat veteran, and I'm CEO of a charitable organisation called Heroic Hearts Project UK. And we are aimed at helping UK military and emergency services veterans gain legal access to psychedelic therapy. And I found myself in this position as head of this charity after struggling with my own traumatic experiences in my warfighting career, and found a profound healing thanks to ayahuasca in the Peruvian Amazon basin. So now I'm a huge supporter of plant medicines, and it's great to be here today on this panel. So thanks for having me.
Thank you for joining us. And Carlos?
Yeah, thank you for inviting me to be a part of this conversation. My name's Carlos Tanner. I'm the director of the Ayahuasca Foundation, which is a nonprofit located in Iquitos, Peru. Obviously, we work with ayahuasca as our primary core of plant medicines, but we work closely with the Shipibo tribe and their curanderos or their healers, working with a wide variety of plant medicines centered around the use of ayahuasca. Last year, we were fortunate enough to host the only ever government-funded study on ayahuasca, specifically with regard to treatment of trauma and depression and anxiety that was funded by the British Medical Research Council. The Ayahuasca Foundation is one of the founding members of the Psychedelic Medicine Association as well. And we offer healing retreats to people from all over the world, but we also offer training courses and have done so for over 10 years to teach the principles of the Shipibo healing tradition called curanderismo, centered around the use of ayahuasca in traditional ceremonies.
Thank you, Carlos. Thank you, everyone, for introducing yourselves. I'm very proud and very happy to have such a diverse panel. So many interesting opinions and stories and different plant medicines as well, which is amazing. I'm going to fire off a general question that's really for all of you before we get into more specifics. And please, jump in as well. Hopefully we can actually get a discussion going on this. So when you think of the commercialization of nature and natural plant medicines, what comes to mind for you? And kind of, is it a positive thing? Is it a negative thing? Kuauhtli, would you like to start?
Well, the history of commerce in the continent, which you call America, has been pretty disastrous for nature. And basically, it's the ravishing of the rivers, the lands, the trees, and it's been pretty devastating. There are some efforts, I think individual efforts for organic methods of harvesting the bounties of nature. But I think when commerce, as is commonly known, has profit as the primary motive, most of the morals and the conscientious decisions are not respected, where when profit is the bottom line. So I think our experience here as Native people has been that whenever business comes in and begins their development is disastrous. I can for example in Texas where the peyote grows naturally and there's millions of plants. What has happened is because of cattle industry, oil industry, ranching, this type of businesses has devastated the natural habitat of peyote. And many people think that it's the overuse of peyote that is causing the depletion in the supply, but actually has nothing to do with overuse, because peyote is a plant that when you harvest it properly by cutting the root, it produces more. Like if you cut one of the buttons, it produces 3 or 4. So it's not that the plant is being over harvested, it's that the natural habitat of the plant is being reduced by industrialization.
Victoria, you're nodding your head. I can see.
With everything you've said, we need to be careful and conscientious in our decisions to move forward. The possible benefit of commercialization is broader access. And I think we all would agree that there are many people in the world who would benefit from these medicines. We've had 50 years of prohibition. So we have a backlog, one could say, of people in crisis. So how do we do this in a sustainable manner? How do we bring in reciprocity, which I hope is a topic we can speak of as well in this conversation today?
Absolutely. I have this in mind. Anybody else would like to add? Carlos, please.
I think that what we're talking about, in terms of commercialization, we tend to like lean towards perhaps the industrialization or even, corporatism. But if you want to just look at commercialization, right when you said, what does that bring to mind? Like my first thought of commercialization of nature was farming. And, of course, the industrialization or the corporatist nature of the current farming industry, I would call devastating. But if you go back to when farmers were, family owned and, farmers basically sold nature to sustain people that needed food, I don't think many people would have a problem with that. And so, I think what we're faced with is the challenge of having a commercialization of nature that is in resonance with it and that is sustainable. Even if you look at the lumber industry, if you go back far enough, just a couple generations in the United States, it was actually quite sustainable. But then a clear cutting, took over for the sake of profits and, immediate profits without thinking of the future. And, I think we're at a point now, and maybe this conversation is an example of that we realize that there are certainly detrimental ways of doing things, and we're trying now to figure out what the best path forward is. But I'm not sure if I would blame it on commercialization, but rather, corporatism or industrialization.
Yes, thank you. I mean, I agree. And the thing is, the topic is wider than just the psychedelic plants and just the healing plants that we're talking about. It's really about nature in general, about which psychedelic plants and plant medicine are one example, and one very hot and current example, which is, where there is a lot of commercial interest. And I think it is absolutely vital that we have discussions as today to really see, how to progress in a way, like Victoria said, to be able to provide access to patients in need, to people in need, but still do it in a careful and an ethical manner to, so that everybody can benefit, hopefully, and nobody. I suppose, Keith, you're nodding your head.
Yeah, I mean, I agree. What's to argue with that? Sustainability is key. Support of the indigenous people and their knowledge is key, at least from my perspective. The first thing, rightly or wrongly, actually, the first thing that popped into my head when you said commercialization was actually changing these compounds and these substances, synthesizing these substances and then turning it into the pharmaceutical industry, which is where I find a danger, because the way that I feel about these plant medicines is that they're actually medicines of the spirit. And if you start to synthesize what is a natural product, and I'm not saying that will always be the case, but this is just what popped into my head. If you start to synthesize these things and putting them in pills or things like that, then the spirit might be removed from that process. And I think that's fundamental to the healing process, but also we miss out the ritualistic and the ceremonial aspect of our healing experiences, which I also think is fundamental.
Kuauhtli, would you like to add to that? I mean, you're obviously the most knowledgeable from us, I think, in terms of the healing and the sacred animal elements of at least the peyote. Is there a risk of using it in the wrong way, basically?
Mescaline was isolated from the peyote plant about 100 years ago by a German scientist that initiated kind of the chemical analysis of plants that are called psychedelic. And then later, mushrooms were analyzed for their molecular components that have the psychedelic effects and so forth. And these molecules, and I agree with the other panelists that this is not necessarily the best way to utilize the knowledge of these plants by mimicking their molecular structure and then using them as pharmaceuticals. And there is a direct connection with the rituals and the plants. And the plants are used to gain a better understanding of how humans can exist on the planet and serve as stewards of nature rather than exploiters of nature. And I think this is where the panelists are focusing on, is the ethical, the moralistic, the conscientious behavior of human beings in regards to nature. And I think this is the essence of it. You know, in our culture, if you take something, you need to give back. Reciprocity is, I think, key in this discussion. Reciprocity for the indigenous peoples, reciprocity for the plant themselves. You know, you can't just harvest plants without offering something and ensuring their constant reproduction. So I think it's a matter of, it's kind of a human dilemma now, that humans are taking. They want to make money, they want to sell, they want to do things, but many times they don't give back in proportion to what they are receiving.
Victoria, you already mentioned reciprocity at the beginning. Is there anything you'd like to say?
Yeah. Yes, I'm American. You can tell from my accent. And when we speak of reciprocity within the pharmaceutical industry, people use or think about corporate social responsibility, CSR. And it's quite different. Reciprocity isn't simply writing a check or giving money. Reciprocity is, as it was just previously spoken so well, it is about engaging so that you know how to give back and what to give back and in what form. I would add as well, on a slightly different topic, that these medicines have been used in sacred ceremonies by communities for centuries, by individuals who are experts. And what is missing as well in the West in some cases is those experts that bring ways of healing that Westerners, namely Europeans and Americans, cannot fully understand, right? So therefore, perhaps are not embracing. So it's not just the plant, but it's how, in what setting it is used. And we use that word a lot in this sector, right? But who is administering the medicine? And are you with other people? Is it ceremonial? Is it sacred? To go to the spiritual comment earlier by Keith. To get the most benefit, right?
Right, yeah. I mean, Carlos, you mentioned earlier that you were actually training in traditional medicines and the traditional users. Is that right? You train Westerners as well who want to be able to use the medicines in a traditional context?
That's right. I agree completely with the need to at first acknowledge and then to understand the importance of the traditions that surround the use of these substances, which is unfortunately something that is almost entirely devoid in our current medical understanding. And like Keith mentioned as well, like the Western paradigm, if you want to call it that, or the modern medical paradigm, doesn't have the word spirit exist within its description of reality. And therefore, it's incredibly challenging to comprehend the concept of spirit within the paradigm of healing that simply doesn't acknowledge its existence. And so, you have two literal separate realities, where one maybe we could just call our ancestral paradigm or the indigenous paradigm, and the other we could refer to as the Western paradigm or the modern medical paradigm. And they are vastly different. And that lends itself to the ancestral traditions looking at the spirit and the consciousness of a being as an aspect of nature of which we all are, and then the contrast of a group of chemicals that somehow accidentally produce consciousness in a completely isolated and separate landscape that has no coherence. You really couldn't get further from being two separate realities. And we've been able to kind of take a good look at the separation paradigm, where it's me against the world and I'm just a collection of molecules, and see how that has played out for us. And then we can also see the 100,000 years of harmony that the earth had with its ancestral paradigm. And it's not hard to see which one was more successful if you're looking at it in terms of sustainability. And so how do we bring the Western modern medical paradigm over or close enough to have that benefit that resulted in sustainability back into what we call reality today? And to me, the tradition, or at least what we refer to as the tradition, which is the methodologies and the rituals that surround the use of it, is like this shining light of a bridge to build between those two paradigms, because we have medicines in both paradigms, but one lacks a method of use and the other has this incredibly complex and well developed and just magnificently wise system of use. And so can we learn from that tradition as to how we can use consciousness activation and consciousness enhancement through the tradition of use that essentially creates the optimal setting, or what I call the optimal inner environment, for which we plant the seeds of medicine and nourish that soil through this ritualistic practice that we refer to as tradition. And that, to me, is not just going to answer the question of how can we make our medicines work better, because it will essentially connect us to that ancestral paradigm and then create a channel, like I said, like a bridge for the rest of this wisdom to come across into our reality of understanding. And so to me, that should be our greatest center of focus with regard specifically to the use of plant medicines or psychedelics, because we have, it just lends itself so perfectly to having the highest outcome in the use of the medicine, but yet is intricately connected to our own ancestral wisdom. And that, to me, seems to be one of the greatest steps forward we could make in our attempt to achieve balance.
Thank you. Keith, you're nodding your head. Is there anything you'd like to add to that?
Yeah, there's not much I can add. No, I agree with, there's been great points. I've not really got anything to add to that at all.
No, I just mean because you obviously have experience with both kind of medicines, I presume, for the thing. And I also wonder often how, can you actually include the sacred element of the traditional use and of the traditional plant medicines in our modern science? Or is it, I didn't.
Well, I suppose much like Carlos is doing is through education and immersion in the original culture, the original cultural setting with the original populations as well, and educating yourself or a community that way. That's got to be the best starting place, instead of just totally isolating and living in one aspect, as Carlos was just describing there. That doesn't seem sustainable. It doesn't sound like you're going to get anywhere near the sort of percentage of healing that you would otherwise. And so I suppose the way forward is through education and connectivity and development of relationships and knowledge and sharing that. as widely as possible, as authentically as possible, I should add as well. It's not book learning. It's not something that you'll be able to Google. It's something that you need to experience from the masters themselves, be that plant or human.
Victoria? Okay. Sorry, you were on mute, Victoria.
Oh, so just one more point, to follow. I agree that immersion in the settings that have such ancestral history, and power are ideal, but I don't see a practical path, and I don't believe that bombarding, indigenous communities with so many visitors is sustainable. So what we are working toward is trying to bring with ayahuasca through sacred medicines as close to indigenous ceremonies as we can, and even the bold desire of our team to figure out how to bring ayahuasca healers or shaman to the United States legally, right? To make this happen. And one of my concerns with the decriminalized nature movement, which I'm very supportive of in concept, is that we aren't bringing the knowledge keepers and the true healers, with these plant medicines into the United States. And what has started here in terms of opening up cannabis, although Canada really led there, but the US and now the psychedelics will spread to other parts of the world. And I feel we need to work on the knowledge keepers and the healers aspect. It's not just the medicines, right? It's the true knowledge and everything that we're talking about here. Don't know how to do that exactly, but that compels our team, right?
I mean, it's very exciting work that you're doing, and I very much hope, that it's progressing well. And
it is. We've slowed down sacred medicines work to be sure that we get it right. Ayahuasca being a sacred medicine with just a profound number of individuals who've carried it forward in the world. How do we do it in a way that honors, right, those who know so much more than we do?
Kuauhtli, are you able to share a bit about the work that you do in Mexico? Are you able to hear?
Actually, yes. I beg your pardon? Well, what I found by traveling around the world, and I visited all the continents, and different social groups, including billionaires from the oil industry, native people in the jungles of Amazon. So, I mean, I've kind of traveled around the planet and shared peyote with many different strata of people. And what I have discovered as fundamental aspects that connect with the elements, a ritual setting. For example, if you have a fire, if you're, drinking water, and if you're in nature, sitting on the earth, and this helps to connect, I guess you could say, to connect back with nature. The elements can be very essential, and it doesn't really matter where you are. You could be in the Giza pyramids, or you could be in, on a mountain in Alaska or Russia somewhere, in Norway, wherever. If you have these elements present, it's always beneficial for the participants. Now, peyote has 52 alkaloids, or even more. Sometimes they're discovering other ones. At one point, they thought they had like 30 something, and then other scientists researched it. I'm not a chemist, but the information they shared with me. Some of these directly designed to help the endocrine system. So the pineal gland, the pituitary gland, the thyroid, the thymus, the adrenals, and the gonads to produce the proper amount of hormones to regulate the physical and the energetic aspects of a person. And what I also found is that the endocrine system is related to the body, to the chakras of a person. They're connected. So by taking the peyote, for example, if a person's depressed, they're probably lacking certain chemicals that are produced in the pineal and the pituitary gland, and if a person is stressed, then they probably have, too much adrenaline and etc. Even in terms of sex,
It's a bit wobbly today, I think.
So these are scientific ways able to affect human beings all over the planet.
Okay. I'm not sure if it's me, but I'm going
What
to...
language they speak. And
Okay.
yeah, what sex they are.
Thank you. Okay. I just received a message that we only have 10 minutes to move on. So I have a few more questions. Thank you, Kuauhtli. Sorry that it seemed to cut off a bit, so I didn't understand every word that you say. But I very much thank you for that. Just going back in terms of what is obviously very important for all of us here present. So just to discuss, is there enough being done in terms to make sure that indigenous communities aren't left behind from any kind of scientific development, or as we just discussed, the kind of commercialization of nature? And what can be done about it? What can we do to ensure that nobody is left behind? Victoria, you're nodding.
I do not think there is enough being done. My understanding of the community, this is very simplified, but it is that there sort of is a distinction between whole plant medicine, where people can see more of a necessary link to communities that have kept these plants alive and thriving for centuries, and pure synthetic tryptamines, where they're seen as separate, and that there isn't necessarily a connection that is needed, that needs to be nourished or supported. And I believe that's an artificial distinction, and we should bring those a little closer together. I also feel, as someone who spent my entire career in the pharmaceutical industry, although over the last 20 years founding my own nonprofits, that industry can take up a new model and begin to work in a different way, but particularly with these medicines, as there's so many for-profit companies in this space. The first few companies who bring medicines to market, and they will be synthetic, could develop significant reciprocity programs. And then that puts pressure on everyone to do that. And as we develop these psychedelic medicines for use right now in Europe and US, Canada, that we should say that's our expectation. This is how we as a community come together to honor and support and respect those who came before us and gave such profound gifts to us.
Excellent. I mean, I very much agree. I'm keen to hear more, maybe at a different time, Victoria, about the different profit or not-for-profit models that you have developed, which I think are very important. Anybody else who would like to add on this? in terms of what can be done to ensure that no one is left behind, and people who should benefit really can benefit from the medicine. Carlos?
Yeah, I'm not sure if I'm a fan of the term left behind. At least from where I stand, we're the ones who are behind, and the indigenous people are the ones leading the way. At least that's my understanding, and the way that I've been so blessed to have my path unfold for me. I think that it's very complicated when you're talking about the production of synthetics, especially, my first thought about a synthetic psychedelic would be lysergic diethylamine, LSD. I'm not sure, who owns the intellectual property rights of LSD, but if you were to attribute it to ergot, then you would have to look at European ancestry and the indigenous people of Europe and Dionysia and those practices, which again, the rituals and the traditions were all completely lost, even though the substance somehow found its way. And, I wholeheartedly believe that we need to have that reciprocity, and we need to take care of each other because we are all part of the same living organism. It seems like a no-brainer, but again, I think that harkens back to the same conflict of paradigms, where you have one paradigm where someone is like, I'm going to, rise above everyone else for my own purposes in a selfish manner because I don't consider myself a part of something much larger. And then you have our ancestry and all of our human ancestral understanding, which denies that perspective completely and says that benefiting yourself as an individual is futile because it's a detriment to the organism that you're a part of. So, I guess what I would hope is that through a paradigm shift from learning from indigenous cultures, the rest of the details will fall into place, but it requires that paradigm shift. And the key to that paradigm shift, I would say, is the recognition or remembering of our core identity as spirit rather than a collection of molecules. And so I do feel like we should be educating ourselves with the ancestors who still have that paradigm intact, which tend to be indigenous people, although not necessarily. And, and then again, like something that Victoria was talking about, traditions have to adapt. And so, if you take a plant from the Amazon and you plant it in Europe, it's going to change according to the needs that it finds in its environment. And that is a quality that's probably the most important quality for survival that we recognize in nature. And so too must it change with traditions. And even if we didn't have anything like LSD, we completely lost the tradition. But I guarantee you that traditions have already been in development. Shamanic traditions are already in development. And so, I'm not so worried about that, to be honest. I just think that if we have access to the tradition, which we don't with LSD, we lost it completely, but we do have it with other plant medicines like peyote and iboga and ayahuasca. And so why not take advantage of the opportunity to learn the most effective way to use those substances and then translate that over to the use not only of other psychedelics, but all medicine as a whole. And that to me should be our goal, really, is to recognize the wisdom of our ancestral traditions and to learn as much as we can about them, because the reality is that they might not be there in the future.
Wise words, absolutely. You can only hope that industry takes all these things into account that you say. So I've just got to know that we've only got 3 minutes left. And I wanted to ask really each of you quickly, so what is the best path forward? I think you outlined it very clearly, Carlos, and I very much hope that it's a realistic option. Keith, would you like to add to that?
I would agree, to be honest. I think the way forward, Victoria made a valid point about we don't want to flood these native communities, these indigenous communities with tourists, definitely not tourists, but even really sincere seekers. But at the same time, if we're going to introduce this into our culture, then we really need to do it by educating and immersing ourselves in the original culture and setting. And we cannot trust when profits are the primary driver. We cannot trust ourselves. We've shown that we're untrustworthy when that happens. So it's going to be really difficult to self-govern ourselves as a Western civilization.
Any other points?
A conference like this one, where we voice our opinions and then we act and bring people together and speak, particularly when we come from different places, when we have different educations and histories, and coming together to figure this out. And we have just a few years before these medicines begin to come forward. It'll probably be MDMA first, which is an amphetamine, not from these plant medicines, but let's not stop talking and let's meet despite this pandemic, right? And propose and let's write. Let's put out there what we want. Let's not be quiet individuals, but really make powerful statements and expectations that others can rise to.
Kuauhtli, anything you would like to add? What's the best way forward? If you can hear us.
Well, yeah, I don't know if you're having difficulty here. I'm here at a location where maybe the Wi-Fi is not the best, but I really enjoyed the comments, and I understand a little more clearly what the focus is, and I think that the modern society is interfacing with the indigenous civilizations. I think a careful analysis of the indigenous people's use of plants would help the modern society, because there's a whole it's used in a context of, I think the word this was paradigms. It's used in an entirely different paradigm. And it would be beneficial to establish some form of commercial relationship with the people. I was in the Amazon recently, and they have categorized 2,000 plants just in a small garden. And they know all the uses of what they're for good eyesight, for everything. Each plant has its use, it's categorized. And this would be of great benefit for modern society. This knowledge could be used not only for the benefit of the people living in the cities, but also of the people that are growing the plants. They do need an economy. They've been forced to develop economies, and they need to develop economies in the lands where they're living, in order to interface with the rest of the world's business model. So yes, I would say sharing some of the economic profits of the use of these plants and traditions, their traditional methods, but at the same time sustain themselves. And yeah, I think I think we started in a good spin. I'm sure there's a lot more to talk about now, that we've opened up the dialogue.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I thank you all so much for joining and for taking part. I think it was super interesting. I think really we should take these things forward, these discussions forward. We're already a good group, but of course there are many more really great people from all kind of different areas. So and hopefully work together on that. I think that's one of the things that we all also agree on. It's not, it's not going to be one individual for themselves. It's something that needs to be done together with indigenous medicine and the Western view as well. So thank you very much. I think we are finished. I've received a message we're finishing.